they currently have about 450 gigawatts of solar,
Yeah.
which is massive already, right?
Yeah.
But China's massive, period. But
Right.
now you're tripling it.
Well, hello, pirates. Welcome back. I'm your host, Lucas Pinko, as normal. And today we have a very special guest, Josh Bodie, partner at Demand Side Analytics. Hello, Josh.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Josh. It's great to have you. And together today we are the Pirates of Clean Tech. Yes, yes. So, Josh, it's great to have you on. I've known you for a long time. We've actually done some work together, which was very, very cool. So, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Demand Side Analytics and what you guys do there.
Yeah, so we're basically a firm that focuses pretty much on doing data analysis of, very detailed data for hourly data, oftentimes or sub-hourly data for things like substations, feeders, AMI meters, system load, and use data. So in essence, as you know, that the whole electric system is basically planned around the peak overall and how those factors contribute. So we do a ton of detailed analysis, and essentially it's like, since you have collection of data going on at a very recurring basis, it's pretty critical in terms of timing of when people use that energy.
So, who do you consult for? Like, you work with utilities?
We work with utilities, we work with regulators, we work with ISOs. Occasionally, we do a bit of work for some of running a whole bunch of pilots on new technology as well. It really depends on the state. Like if we go to a state, we pick one set of folks and that's it, right? And the whole process is you kind of have like this trifecta of decisions that have to be made. There's the utility that wants to run it, there's the regulator, but they often require somebody separate to run a whole bunch of analysis to make sure that it's valid, as a whole. But I think that's one of the cool parts of the job I've had is like I've been very lucky, right? As I got lots of exposure to data from all over the country. I've probably worked with AMI data from 20 plus utilities, millions of meters, and really have, if you show me like patterns, I just see it because I've worked with it so much.
Oh, that's super cool. So, a lot of our listeners are, up and coming in their careers. So, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your career progression. Like, how did you get here? What path did you take?
Well, I call it part luck, right? That's a given. Part essentially like work ethic, but also kind of like having a good team around you, right? So I actually was in grad school at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, and I was not focused on energy. I was really focused on I want to build skills, I want to deal with data analysis. This is before data science was a thing, right? And in essence, and research methods, risk analysis, all that kind of stuff. And my philosophy is get the skill set, you can figure out how to use it, you can apply it really widely. So that's advice number one, just focus on your skill set first and foremost, because you can learn an industry pretty easily once you get into it. And I happened to sit in a class with somebody named Andrew McAllister. He happens to be the chairperson for the California Energy Commission right now. And it was a research design class. I remember that very quickly. And he brought up like a topic, which was basically gigantic energy efficiency proceeding, which is the biggest one of the type around that time in California. And we did a whole bunch of work on that. And then afterwards, I literally just picked up the phone, called up one of the PUC commissioners that was handling that, and said, "Hey, I'll work for you for free for the next 6 months if you'll take me." Send in my resume, and they said yes. And that's how I got started in the energy industry.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So that's lesson number 2, right? Don't be scared to take a shot at it. I literally just took a shot at it and I started doing work for her. It was Susan Kennedy at that point in time at the California Public Utilities Commission, and just got my head really deep into energy at that stage. I always was fascinated by it, but I wasn't sure where to make the entry overall. And I think like bumping into Andrew kind of really helped me sort that out. He doesn't know that though.
Well, he might now. So that's great. It's kind of like a make your own internship, right? Like,
yeah. And I think that's something that you like. I always tell people, never shut a door on yourself. There's enough people who want to shut a door on you. So I personally make it my goal not to close the door on myself. It's like, I'm not going to say I can't do this, or this opportunity is something that's not going to be available. I'll see if I can crack the door open, or if there's something there.
Interesting. Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into some meat, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, so you've talked about the need to change system planning. I'm assuming you're meaning the electrical system, right? So
Yeah.
what is how critically important is that?
I mean, it's incredibly important. It's like, as soon as you try to integrate the amount of renewables that we're looking at having this massive transformation in your system, all the infrastructure needs to change to go along with it. But not only that, but the way you plan for things needs to change. And to me, it's instructive to kind of see it move slowly, right? Because a lot of the planning that we do is often what I call like fake probabilistic, because they use terms like 1 in 10, 1 in 2
Mhm,
probabilities, but there's a lot of scenario planning behind it.
mhm,
And when you look at something like what happened in Texas or what happened in California last year, right, where you had rolling blackouts, Texas was way worse. A lot of that kind of goes back to having planning standards that aren't regularly updated and using methods that have been around for,
mhm,
years and years
mhm.
that really need to be updated. So
Decades. Yeah.
yeah, to give you an example, I mean, it's like most of the planning for the grid is done around here's your 1 and 2 or normal peak demand, normal year peak demand,
Right.
and plus a buffer, right? And in California, the buffer has been 15%. Nobody has updated that buffer for probably like 30 plus years.
Huh.
And realistically, that buffer itself doesn't factor in the fact that your grid has gone through dramatic changes, such as you no longer have a whole bunch of imports coming from like the Northwest into California, because the Northwest is not winter peaking as much. They're very summer peak. They tipped them over. They're kind of halfway summer winter peaking. So the imports are reduced, right? You have obviously a lot more wind and solar that you need to factor into your planning, and weather's changing. So until you start factoring all those issues, into the planning process and updating your methods and factoring in that uncertainty, it becomes much more. You're going to be off in your planning processes. So I personally just think like changing the way we do planning and really kind of getting down and looking underneath the hood and seeing all these model assumptions that you have built up, do they really work? That makes a big
Yeah.
difference. But then you have to look forward and say, well, how do I need to adapt the model given that we're looking at a transformational change in the electric grid?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the follow-up question is what would you do, right? I mean, we
Yep.
had Gavin Dillingham on from the Houston Advanced Research Center, and he was suggesting that we have to look at the details in these climate models they're doing in the future,
Yep.
because they give you information about like the spread of weather
Hmm.
events, right, and the statistical spread, and we need
Yep.
to take these kind of microclimate predictions, I guess he called them, into our planning. Like I thought that was a great idea. Do you what do you think? I mean,
I mean, I think that matters some. To me, the biggest issue is the correlated risk, right? So, and
mm,
it's really hard when you have these extreme conditions. You don't see them very often enough to be able to define the shape of the tail as well, and you don't see them often enough to be able to define really here's the correlated risk. So if you look at Texas, it's like
mm,
I think people anticipated having a cold weather snap like what they had in the past. It's not what they planned for, right? What they didn't anticipate is having what was it, like 40,000 megawatts of gas and coal that was out, or
right,
having everything freeze up overall, right? And
right,
they just hadn't planned for that. And obviously, that risk is easier to see in hindsight than enforce going forward. And to some extent, you're not going to pay for reliability that's perfect. But that was really extreme. That was kind of like a situation where they had the foresight because that happened in 2011, I believe it was, and they had done the studies and said, hey, you must go ahead and deal with the fact that your gas wells are going to freeze up and weatherize all these power plants and
right,
strengthen your gas supply.
right,
And people just ignored that study. And
yeah,
all it took was regulatory will to go ahead and enact that and make sure that you put those policies in place. So to me, like Texas is, it was actually a very foreseeable issue, but it also raises the opposite side, right? It's like a lot of people think like, well, people are making the argument you have to build more, you have to build more peakers, more resources in Texas, and that's actually a very bad argument because we had a lot of capacity built, but it was inoperable capacity.
right. Well, right. If it's not going to be there when you need it, then what's the point?
Exactly, right. And it's interesting that gas power plants are treated as solid capacity coal as well. And that was a situation where they failed to show up in mass. Not because of the power plant itself, but it was really the planning around the gas supply and the
Yeah.
cold weather spell.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could get back to this concept of correlated risk. I mean, can you give another example of like what a correlated risk might be in New York or in California?
I'll go to California because we just had the outages over the summer, right?
Yeah.
Correlated risk is we had fires and really hot weather. So I remember that weekend really, I'm in the Bay Area,
Okay.
right? And the fires are far away, but all of the cloud kind of comes in. And I don't know if you remember seeing those pictures of Orange Day, where you literally didn't have the sun come out. But that weekend when they had those outages, it was a type of heat that we don't typically experience here. You couldn't find any cooling. It was kind of a little bit of a haze. It was hot. It was really hot, but some of it was tied to the fires themselves. So realistically, and obviously if you have fires, it makes it harder to operate your transmission system.
Yeah.
And it makes it also harder to predict, and COVID on top of that, right? Which makes it very hard to predict what will be your demand for the next few days or the weekend overall. So one of the big issues that happened with the California blackouts is the fact that literally the Cal ISO said, hey, we have about 4,000 megawatts of generation. Go home. We don't need you going forward because we have enough supply. So they had the bids, they had the install capacity, but they basically released and didn't have the commitments from them and allowed them to bid elsewhere and export elsewhere, in part because the forecasts were off. But if I'm sitting in their position and I have a summer with COVID, a summer with basically tons of fire risk going on, I'm sitting here and saying, I think I need to make those confidence bands of my forecast a little bit fatter. It's a judgmental call, but realistically, it's like that you're not planning for normal conditions.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit too about flexible load. Like, can flexible load play a role here? And how should we be pushing for that? And I asked Neil too about the DER, tariff at FERC. So yeah, what can you tell us here?
I would classify flexible load into two buckets, right? Because you kind of have like the day-to-day flexibility in response to things like prices or conditions that you call. But I think there's a category that often gets missed, which is going to be like possibility of having like emergency only flexible load. And the reason I raised this is the fact that Art Rosenfeld, way back when, he had tried to push a process that said, hey, everybody, as a condition of service, you have to have your smart thermostat, or in that case, it was a programmable thermostat in place, but give us the ability, if there is an emergency, you're not going to use this for planning, but there is an emergency, to set back the thermostat 4 degrees. And you have to think about it. It's like if you look at this actually applies to Texas as well, right? But if you look at the amount of demand that goes on the system, it has to do with heating or cooling. And just having that ability to sit there and say, okay, we're going to change the temperature by 4 degrees across the board can avoid a lot of blackouts. The issue with flexible loads is it's opt-in, it's voluntary. People need to roll in, and you don't have it's not a default. So the amount of flexibility you have, it responds quickly. I mean, like there's been studies for years that show your response can happen in like seconds, less than a minute. You see load just drop. Have you ever seen this happen? And you say, when I drop the load in control thermostats, water heaters, batteries, EVs, you hit that button, the load just drops. But in practice, you have to have enough bulk for it to matter. So to some extent, I want to think about flexible load as having two categories. Here's the one that you use every day to provide the services. Here's the subset that is effectively, I would push to say, call it like a default, a condition of service, so that rather than having outages and you need to hit an emergency, you basically just have a few degrees of additional heat. Now it doesn't, so 4 degrees setback in terms of the temperature. And that drops, probably more than roughly about 60% of your load is associated with the weather when it comes to peak demand. So like realistically, that shift can have a pretty massive impact. It's not going to solve things like Texas, because I mean that was completely
Well,
at a different scale.
well, right. I mean, and that's a problem we're going to look at in the Northeast here. That
Yep.
if we start being winter peaking, I mean, you can't. I don't know if you can do the
Well,
same thing with cold that you can with heat, right?
in my view, it's like, like having like thermostats in particular should be free. Like smart thermostats, and the reason why is they give you energy efficiency. They give you the ability to control in the summer and the ability to control in the winter if you have electric heating.
Yeah,
And realistically, they're more than pay for themselves.
yeah,
As long as you have the ability to say, all right, we're going to have some amount of control if we're reach a situation that's extreme. Now, you don't want to do this every single day, but you want to have that capability built in.
yeah. I mean, that's one thing I love about EVs too. If we get a lot of EVs coming onto the grid and we have a huge load, they're already, flexible by default, right?
Have you checked? There's a API, and this is not a plug, called Smart Cars. Have you checked it out?
No, well, I know there's a couple of them actually out
Yeah,
there.
there's more than a few of them. That's the one I use,
Yeah.
but it's fascinating because you can actually sit there and they've hooked up all the vehicle manufacturers, and rather than trying to manage the charger, you're literally trying to manage the car, and you can manage that. It's really scheduled charging, and you kind of have to have that even for the everyday grid, because if me, you, and neighbor next door has an EV, you can't have them all come on at the same time. You
Right.
essentially need to schedule them out little by little.
Right. Well, that's a good idea. And I know utilities are looking for help on how to help manage that situation, right? That exact situation you just brought up, right?
Yep, there's a lot of studies going on about
I'll
it. Yep.
bet they are.
Hmm.
I've done one myself, so I know exactly what they're after. And from what I found, the results were very good. But those were early adopters, right?
Yes.
That's one thing I worry about is, you're going to get early adopters and they're going to give you good results on whatever you study. And then when it hits mass adoption, all that's going to go away, right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's technology, technology works.
Right.
It's really a question of, can you give people what they want, which is my car charged, while managing when it happens, right? So if
Right.
you look at it from a standpoint, that's a constraint. You have to make sure the customer has what they need, and then
Right.
you have some flexibility around some of the management. Then you can probably do it. I think the biggest challenge, which is completely understated, is less the ability to control and use devices, but really the ability to get customers to enroll.
Right.
And if it really makes a big difference if it's a default versus opt-in approach, and it makes a huge difference in terms of incentives and all those components, because they need to be compensated for essentially giving you some of their control.
Right. So if people leave their office at 5 and they get home at 6 and they plug in right away, 6 p.m. is really not a good time to be dropping a lot of load on the grid, right? So
Nope,
something
it's
that
probably the
would
worst time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, something that would just move that. And we've seen that most people don't drive their EV very far every day, right? So
I mean, I have my EV set up to essentially just start charging at 10 p.m. Right. So
right.
if I plug it at 6, it starts charging at 10.
Start that.
But it's not the default. You have to go in and say that's my default setting that I want to do it. So if
Right.
you make that the default setting, then it becomes much more manageable. You know,
Well,
and you can have deals with people say, I'm only gonna manage some of the charging if you get past 50, if you're above 50% charge capacity. You
right.
know,
Right. Or, they're talking about some kind of signal from the utility to say, okay, now you can charge, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
the API. Right. Okay.
yeah.
And then what about winter peak though? I mean, winter peak might be in the morning when it's cold, if it's peak
Yeah,
then.
that's precisely it. I mean, that's when it happens. There's lots of places that peak in the winter. I mean, surprisingly, a lot of places in the South have a lot of electric heating,
Hmm.
and they peak. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, they all have tons of electric heating. Texas too,
Huh.
but essentially they have pretty big winter peaks already. And the Northwest is the other area that has relatively large winter peaks. I mean, there's two things. One of them is like heat pumps. If you put them in, they're about a third of the energy use in terms of consumption. You have to be careful there because they will draw on the secondary source of power if it gets way too cold. But the newest generation can withstand pretty cold weather before they really draw on that. So a lot of the issue with really big winter peaks has to do with having basically inefficient electric heating rather than efficient electric heating. But I think in the scheme of things, it needs to be a balance, right? You can't go to 100% electrification in heating all at once, and
Right.
you're going to have to do it over time and evolve your grid to accommodate it. But if you just think about it from a customer standpoint, if I have a more use of the grid, winter and summer, what does that do? It lowers my rate, because right now we're paying for all the infrastructure, even though we have a extreme peak in the summer only. So your utilization goes up by having that electrification, whether it's electric vehicles or whether
Wow,
it's
that's true.
heat pumps, and at least your transmission and distribution portion rate would go down. So it's I think it's a challenge. It's a solvable challenge, but this very better than most people, but that there's a lot of details in implementation, and you can walk in with one set of assumptions, you test it, then you need to adjust. And I think too often we make the grand plan and don't go through the homework of testing the assumptions and adjusting and updating the plan afterwards.
Yeah. And one of the details is those savings only appear if all that load is off peak, right? That drives up your utilization. You can't raise
Yep.
your peak. Yeah. Which
Yeah.
brings us back to the flexible load, right?
Well, yeah, and I think that makes a difference. But also you have situations where you have, utilities that are almost dual peaking, so it's not like as long as your new winter peak is not higher than your summer peak, you're probably okay, because you don't have to plan for a bigger grid.
Right.
You just need to make sure in that case, you either don't have gas supply or you have secure gas supply.
And you cut your maintenance period. They do
Yes.
maintenance in the winter now. They won't be able to do that just in
Yep.
the shoulder months, I guess. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, okay. One more thing. You said inefficient electric heating. So what's efficient electric heating? Is it heat pump, which is a heat pump, or what?
Yeah. I mean, it's heat. I mean, you know this very clearly. It's like the first thing you want to do is make your home efficient. That's number one. And if you get down to like looking at heat pumps, they use about a third of the electric power as electric resistance heating. If you look at electric resistant heatings, those are big loads on the home and on the system. But if you look at heat pump loads, they're literally about a third. So it's a lot less strain on the grid. You're still getting the same output, which is the heat, but just a lot less strain.
Wow. Okay. Okay, cool. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I love to geek out, and we could geek out forever on this, but we gotta
we need to put up some plots for people to look at, right?
Yeah.
Because I can see like you're visualizing it, so am I, but I don't know if everybody can visualize what electric heating shape looks like, or AC load shape.
Well, we should have a workshop or something. Here's how to fix the grid, according to Josh and Lucas.
To be revised about 2 months later.
Yeah, every 2 months. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
All right, so you're gonna stick around for some articles, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, articles. We only have 2 articles this week. I wanted to keep it kind of short and sweet, but just on the big ones. Again, there's a ton of interesting news going on, especially the Texas thing is still going, but I don't want to bring that up again. So I saw some really big items I wanted to talk about. The first one here from Green Tech Media. This might be the last Green Tech Media article you're ever going to see on the show. Sad to say, Green Tech Media has been sunset by Wood Mackenzie. They kept the research arm, but no more Green Tech Media. So
I did not realize that. That's a big one.
So we'll say a prayer for GTM, and we got to send them off the right way. So they had this incredible article, which I love. New plans reveal how China's grid is prepping for net zero carbon. This is great news to me. This is from March 3rd from John Parnell. Terawatts of renewables and the world's largest EV charging network is going to happen in China, and they want to peak carbon emissions by 2030. This is great news. I don't know if you've ever seen projections of global carbon output. They will be driven by China and India. They are huge. They have so many people.
I actually love the fact that it's not a US article and there's just a China article.
Right.
Because like we focus so much on what we do here. And like you said, they have billions of people, and they're all like have the electricity use growing very quickly because they're moving up the curve of essentially kind of shifting from, to more and more advanced economy.
Right.
And with it, oftentimes comes more electricity. I was looking at some data on this, and basically, like the energy use per capita. So energy use per capita has more than doubled over the past 10 years in China.
Yep. And they're growing, and they're moving from a poor agrarian economy to a modern, sophisticated middle class economy with a quality of life like we enjoy, right? And so it became like a geopolitical issue. Like they're still increasing carbon output, we're decreasing carbon output, us and Europe in the advanced economies. So it becomes a geopolitical issue of pressuring them to slow down with the carbon increase to get them to turn around. So this is fantastic news to me. This is going to take a huge chunk out of global carbon output into the atmosphere. And I can't get enough of this. I think they set a target of 2060 to be net zero, which leaves a little bit desired, but they're still increasing. So they've got a long ways to go.
Well, I think their point of just still increasing is a big deal, because here, if we shift to say renewables, that basically means you're displacing other jobs in fossil fuel industry. Here they have to build out the grid. They have to build out their capacity. So they're basically at that point where if they start shifting and building out the capacity and make it renewable at this point or more sustainable, then they don't necessarily have to displace as much of the existing use. They're essentially building for the next set of folks that are coming on board and trying to meet those needs. So I think they're in a very different spot because they're going to be building something no matter what. And it's much better they're building something that's green and sustainable than not.
Well, right. I mean, it's easier to fix it now before you build it, right? I mean, they're saying here from 2020 to 2030, they're going to increase growth in electricity 64%, which is crazy. And so they're going to require car makers to have 40% EVs by 2030. So, that's kind of what I just said. Like, you should build it. If you're building it, just build it right from the beginning. So I thought this was great news. I hadn't seen a lot of good news come out of China. I don't know if you guys know about the pollution problems there, and
well, if you look at, I mean, up higher in the article, they're pointing out like they currently have about 450 gigawatts of solar, which is massive already, right?
Yeah.
But China's massive, period. But now you're tripling it. I mean, that's the goal, is to triple it in the near term. So it's a big shift that you're expecting to happen.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of solar panels.
That is a lot. Yep.
So as far as making progress on climate, I think that's even if we went to zero, you're still talking, not even making a dent in what you're talking about. If they were to go full coal and natural gas, I mean, it wouldn't even matter what we did,
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll take whatever we can get.
Yeah. Okay, I wanted to talk about this one next. This is from InsideClimateNews.org. A furious industry backlash greets moves by California cities to ban natural gas in new construction. I thought this has been an interesting development over the past couple of years, that cities, very forward-leaning cities, have tried to ban new natural gas installations, which I thought is interesting. I mean, it's definitely something you want to do if you want to stop fossil fuel expansion right now. But what's happening is the industry is pushing back, and they're trying to go directly to the states and ban bans, which sounds kind of crazy. But so here's the states where they've actually pushed through bans on banning natural gas. So Arizona, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Tennessee. I mean, these aren't too shocking. These are natural gas kind of industry states, right? But there are all these other.
Do you think they're going to be decarbonizing their gas system in the near term? I don't think those are states that really matter. They're not going to be leading that.
Well, right. But some of these other ones with proposed bans, again, makes sense.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And Florida burns a lot of natural gas, right? And Texas. So, yeah, I don't see California in here. So I don't know. You make a good point. I mean, is this really going to have an impact? Should we be concerned about this?
Yeah, but I think this just points to the whole issue of, it's like whenever you go after an entrenched position where somebody is making money off something, they're going to want to cling to their source of money in that case, right?
Right.
And again, it's a shift. There's lots of HVAC contractors who deal with gas. There's people who deal with like mass gas sales. There's people who deal with stove sales. Um, but some of it's like a political reaction, like you said earlier. But some of it is just people, banding together and saying, hey, we don't want to see change. And it's just a question of what's going to be the pace of change to
Yeah.
get there. Because if you're going to deal with decarbonization, at some point you have to tackle natural gas. And the question is how to do it in a way that doesn't disrupt our everyday lives, and it kind of flows in naturally over time.
Right. I mean, I still count on natural gas to heat my home. So
Hmm.
yeah, we
Well,
do have to, we can't just drop it, right?
and it depends where you're at too, because I mean, it's like if you're in the Northeast, there's a lot of like propane and oil heating, and gas is actually going to be better than propane or oil, at least from emission standpoint. But it's a question where it is in the pecking order in terms of issues that we need to tackle.
Yeah.
But I do think like the whole notion of don't ban existing gas, a lot of these are partial bans. They're not necessarily banning everything. Some of them are just for commercial or for like multifamily buildings. But some of that makes sense because that's the way you can enact that shift little by little, because you're not really affecting people who've already had the gas in place. You're not penalizing them. You're really saying going forward, we need to change our planning. You
Yeah.
know, uh, but it's just a question of what is the pace and getting people used to that little by little, and saying, yeah, you can have heat, you can have cooking, you can have everything that you want without necessarily having gas run to your home. Because at the end of the day, I don't care about whether it's gas or whether it's electric, except for maybe grilling. But at the end of the what you care about is, am I getting heat to my house? Am I able to cook my food? Am I getting hot water?
Yeah. Well, but I just think, it's in vogue right now for everybody to have a net zero by this date plan. Here's
Hmm.
one in Massachusetts by 2050. But I don't think people understand that if you install a natural gas furnace right now,
Yep.
it's going to have a useful life to 2050. So, I
Hmm.
mean, at some point, these plans have to reconcile with, useful life of existing and new assets. And we're going to have to say, look, if you really want to do net zero by 2050, Massachusetts, you have to stop installing new gas burning equipment. That's what it is.
Yep. No, I think you're absolutely right. So you kind of have to see that shift happen. I think what jumps out about this one is that it's so overt. It's saying we're going to basically not have gas in there, because you could set different targets. Say it's going to be an energy target, and or based one on CO2, for example, or fuel emissions. And you have to have a fuel budget essentially. That you have, if you build new construction, you must be within this fuel budget, which essentially pushes people towards decarbonizing. But these steps are really overt. They're really saying, hey, like we are actually specifically going to begin gas installation of gas end uses.
Yeah. Yeah. They're saying here, Colorado and New York, two other states that are thinking about it, but they're trying to work it into policy. I mean, this is an issue too, because we have large, expensive natural gas distribution and transmission,
Hmm.
and those assets are going to end up stranded. I mean, what are you going to do with all that? So, yeah, that's also a messy situation.
That's something you have to plan around. It's like the question is how
Yeah.
can you change it and shift it. You've probably seen this where people have started discussing how do you change your gas pipeline infrastructure to provide other types of services like hydrogen potentially. I don't know how realistic that is because of the timing of how fast that will go. But one thing that people
Yeah.
don't realize, if you put in a gas pipeline nowadays, they're usually PVC, and they're going to last 90 plus years. So really, like at this stage, we shouldn't be adding new like gas hookups or expanding the gas system if this is really the case. That you're going to be trying to essentially reduce your dependency on natural gas.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure for it is very long lasting, but it also can be
Yeah.
used for a lot of other things.
Well, that's true. I mean, we've talked about it on the show that you could put renewable natural gas in there, you could put
Hmm.
hydrogen in there, you can mix them, and you can
Hmm.
separate them later. I mean, there's lots of options. So, um, I mean, just banning, equipment that uses natural gas maybe not is not the best way to go.
from a policy standpoint, I'm a big fan of telling folks what the goals are, not telling them
Right.
how to go about it. Right.
Well,
So
right.
if I'm sitting here, if I'm a policymaker, I'll be focused very carefully on saying, okay, well, we want to reduce our dependency on CO2 overall, or emissions. We want to reduce emissions very targetedly and make that the goal. Let people, and you can set pretty strict goals and benchmarks, but let folks evolve in terms of figuring out how they want to deal with that.
Right.
So if you really want that gas stove, you can do it, but you got to sacrifice something else.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it kind of makes you in the pro carbon tax kind of space too, because then you just let the market figure it out, right?
Well, I do think like you should give people choices. You can kind of engineer or structure the choice architecture so that that some choices are going to make more sense, because the big issue with gas or any type of fossil fuel is that it doesn't have the full cost of it internalized.
Right. Correct.
So what you're basically doing with, obviously most folks agree that who deal with this in a serious way agree that if you could put a carbon tax, that would be the most efficient way to do it. But the reality is, we know that's not going to happen in the near term. But putting in mandates is actually a really effective way to get things done, because over and over, you put in the mandate and people will say, hey, no, that's impossible, we can't do it. And then 10 years down the line, they met the mandate. But I kind of think like the mandate has to have some amount of choice for people so they can make those trade-offs and figure out what's the right way to do it.
Yeah, agreed. Well, Josh, this has been fantastic. Obviously, I think we could geek out forever on this stuff. And it sounds like we've solved the whole grid climate change issue altogether in this hour. So that's good.
For 2 months. Yeah.
And then everything will change, right? So where can people go to find you? Do you have a website?
I have a website. It's called demandsideanalytics.com.
Okay.
We run a regular blog on there too, and folks can just reach out to me and find me via LinkedIn. If you type in my name, Josh Bode, Bode, and my firm name, then you'll find me. And happy to chat with anybody or give folks advice.
Really cool. Thanks for coming on, Josh. We'll have to have you back sometime soon.
Yeah, next time we have to do over some whiskey or something.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we didn't have a beer or anything.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for being on the Pirates of Clean Tech. And yeah, we'll see you next week.
All right, later.
Yar.
Yar.
Yar.